Hey everybody, Chris here. The Warrior of Elements is the update to the Way of the Four Elements monk from the 2014 Player's Handbook, and that subclass was infamous and considered by many to be the weakest subclass in the game, or at least the weakest monk subclass. And I might have agreed until Xanathars came out and gave us the Sun Soul Monk. I gotta think if they had put the Sun Soul Monk in the 2024 Player's Handbook instead of the Warrior of Mercy Monk, I think that would have been a lot better. But, that didn't happen. Anyways, Way of Four Elements used a unique system of Monk picking spells or spell like features that tended to come on pretty late, and they cost a ridiculous amount of key to use. And, if you had an endless supply of key, then it might have been a decent subclass. But if you want to do stuff like Stunning Strike or Flurry of Blows, well, then it really wasn't. So it was unsurprising to see them rebuild the entire subclass from scratch. Mechanically, the Warrior of Elements looks a lot more like other subclasses now, gaining fairly normal looking features at the expected levels. It also catapulted from a subclass I almost never saw to the subclass I now see for Monk more than any other by quite a bit. So, why is it so popular all of a sudden? Let's take a look starting at level 3. So, at level 3, we're going to get Elemental Attunement. At the start of your turn, you can expend one focus point to imbue yourself with elemental energy. The energy lasts for 10 minutes or until you have the incapacitated condition. You gain the following benefits while the feature is active. First, you get Reach. When you make an unarmed strike, your reach is 10 feet greater than normal as elemental energy extends from you. And Elemental Strikes. Whenever you hit with your unarmed strike, you can cause it to deal your choice of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage rather than its normal damage type. When you deal one of these types of damage with it, you can also force the target to make a strength saving throw, and on a failed save, you can move the target up to 10 feet towards you or away from you, as the elemental energy swirls around it. There is a lot to unpack here. The first thing of note is this does not use an action or a bonus action to activate. You just activate it at the start of your turn using the focus point. It's going to last at least one combat and maybe more. Or if you need it outside of combat, like maybe, you want to burn something by repeatedly hitting it with fire damage, you can do that as well. The second is the reach. With a quick reading, you might see 10 feet and think that means you have 10 feet of reach with your unarmed strikes, but no, you start with a 5 feet of reach, so when you add 10 more feet, you have a total of 15 feet of reach with your unarmed strikes. The way this is written takes into account possible other increases to your reach, like for example, if you're a bugbear, but note this isn't a reach increase for just any attack, only unarmed strikes. What isn't super clear is what happens if you use that unarmed strike to do a grapple or a push. It is worded a little bit weird. Like it should probably say that the reach of your unarmed strikes is 10 feet greater than normal, period. That would be crystal clear, but instead it says when you make an unarmed strike, your reach is 10 feet greater than normal, which kind of implies that your reach isn't 10 feet greater than normal when you aren't making an unarmed strike. The reason this makes a difference is if you use that extra reach to grapple something, if your reach is only greater when you make the unarmed strike, then afterwards, presumably the target is now out of your reach, which would, according to the grapple rules, break the grapple instantly. And I don't think that is the intention. But, like I say, a very simple change to wording would have made that clear. Now, rules wonks like me are looking for official guidance. And all I could really find is there's an article on D&D Beyond that is written by Mike Bernier, who did not design the subclass. I don't think he's a member of the design team. I assume he's a member of the D&D Beyond team. And this article's almost a year old, and I had to search for it. But anyway, the article says, if you're looking to spice things up, the new Grappler feat combines exceptionally well with the Warrior of Elements extended reach and the 2024 Monk's ability to grapple using dexterity. With the Grappler feat, you can attempt to grapple a creature you hit as part of the same attack action you use to make an unarmed strike. Seeing as being grappled reduces a creature's speed to 0, you can easily hold them out of reach and wail on them with your elemental strikes, which you'll now get advantage on thanks to Grappler. So the article is pretty clear, but whether Mike checked with the design team to make sure that's how the feature worked, I don't know. But yeah, I think you're supposed to be able to grapple creatures using the reach and then hold the grapple, but there's a wording interpretation that says otherwise, so it's at least worth checking with your DM on how they want to run it. Then you have 5 additional damage types that the unarmed strike can inflict, and these are not required. If you want to keep inflicting bludgeoning damage or eventually force damage, you can do that. This feature also allows you to switch that damage type with each attack. So if you want to inflict fire damage and then cold damage and then fire damage again, then you can do that. Finally, with every single hit, you can try to either push or pull the enemy by up to 10 feet. Now, they make a strength saving throw to avoid the force movement, but there is no size restriction here, unlike the Push Mastery or the Crusher feat. But you can only gain the force movement rider if you deal the damage of one of the 5 extra types. So your bludgeoning or force damage unarmed strike gets the extra reach, but not the force movement. So I can't help but compare this to the other monk subclass features, like the Warrior of the Open Hand 3rd level feature that can push a target up to 15 feet on a failed saving throw if they hit it with an unarmed strike using Flurry of Blows, which is nice, and it's 15 feet instead of 10, but it's only with Flurry of Blows. Here we're getting the force movement with unarmed strikes from our attack action, or the martial arts bonus action attacks, or even like an opportunity attack, and we can still pull or push with that. And that just seems a lot better to me. Or the poor way of the Astral Self Monk. This used to be the way to get additional reach with unarmed strikes, but it was 5 feet of extra reach, and it used your bonus action to set up in the first place. So this feature isn't just really good, it also compares very well to other similar features from different subclasses. There are a couple limitations though, and I do want to point them out. The first is actually the damage type, because yeah, sure, it seems like it's a big advantage to get access to 5 additional damage types. And obviously it's thematic, it's an Elements Monk, but once you have force damage available, then your damage type is totally reliable, and that normally would be the damage you would want to use, because it is way more reliable than any of these 5 damage types. Now, if you're thinking about exploiting damage vulnerabilities, well, so was I. So I looked for every monster in the 2024 Monster Manual that is vulnerable to any of these damage types, and for all 5, there is a total of 14 of them out of 504 stat blocks, meaning over 97% of monsters aren't vulnerable to any of these damage types. It's basically a non-factor. But you need to use one of these damage types to get the force movement, and they are all less reliable than force damage. And you don't necessarily know which damage types that enemy is resistant or, God forbid, immune to. But I can give you some guidance here, because if we look at the Monster Manual, there are 22 that are resistant to acid and 18 that are immune. There are 64 resistant to cold, that's the one that has the most resistance, and 22 that are immune. And then with fire, there's 49 that are resistant, and then there's 47 that are immune. That's the most immunities. Then there are 35 that are resistant to lightning, 19 of them are immune, and then 12 are resistant to thunder, and 4 are immune. So unsurprisingly, your best bet of those 5 is thunder damage, with a total of 16 creatures either immune or resistant, which is more than the number of creatures vulnerable to any of these damage types all put together. But compared to force damage, for which none of the Monster Manual creatures are resistant or immune, it's strictly a worse option. And it's not always obvious. Like, you might not guess that Sloths are resistant to thunder damage, or Empyreans, or Incorporeal Undead, or that I just lied to you and Empyreans are not resistant to thunder damage, they're actually immune. I bet you didn't know that. Okay, I'm sure you knew that, But you're a liar because they aren't immune to thunder damage either. I lied to you again. My point is that whenever you use any of these damage types, you give up the reliability of the force damage, and you likely are not fighting something that's vulnerable to any of them. But if you want to push or pull something, you have to take the gamble. And that is a restriction, not a feature. And the other restriction to note is the pushing and pulling, as well as the reach, don't require flurry blows or anything, but they do require unarmed strikes, which means if you want to take advantage of that cool magic weapon you got, or maybe you took the weapon mastery feat, well, they're not going to benefit at all from this feature. It really pushes you to use unarmed strikes with all your attacks. Now, fortunately, we now have the Wraps of Unarmed Power right in the Dungeon Master's Guide that can provide up to a +3 bonus to hidden damage with unarmed strikes and no attunement requirement. If you're using magic item crafting, the +1 version is uncommon, which isn't that difficult or expensive to craft. This is a good feature. It's really strong even compared to the other 2024 monk subclasses. We do get this little ribbon on top of it though. Manipulate elements. You know the elementalism spell. Wisdom is your spellcasting ability for it. So here's the elementalism cantrip. It is a flavor cantrip. It's not unlike Prestidigitation. However, unlike Prestidigitation, I think you'll have a much harder time actually squeezing actual benefits from elementalism, whether it's utility or tactical. This is not a strong cantrip, but the flavor is very thematic to the subclass. Level 3, though, for this subclass, I consider unmatched. There's a lot of stuff packed into elemental attunement, and the mechanics overall are extremely favorable, with very few pain points that are ultimately fairly minor. I feel comfortable giving this 5 stars. I think this will be the only monk subclass to get a 5-star 3rd level feature, though if you know of a monk subclass that has a 3rd level feature you think compares to the Warrior of Elements, let us know in the comments. Otherwise, let's move on to level 6 and Elemental Burst. As a magic action, you expend 2 focus points to cause elemental energy to burst in a 20-foot radius sphere centered on a point within 120 feet of yourself. Choose a damage type: acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. Each creature in the sphere must make a dexterity saving throw, and on a failed save, a creature takes damage of the chosen type equal to 3 rolls of your martial arts die, which at this level is going to be a d8. On a successful save, a creature takes half as much damage. Now, remember 3rd level and those 5 stars? We're not going to repeat that at 6th level. I'll say that much. Mechanically, Elemental Burst is not unlike taking a slightly lower range fireball and giving it the damage of Shatter. And yes, like with unarmed strikes, Thunder is your most reliable option, a lot like the damage of a Shatter spell. The damage does scale with your level, but it maxes out at 3d12. That is less damage than an equivalent level Dragonborn does with their breath weapon at that level. So the scaling here is not good. However, monks usually don't get area of effect damage options at all. So if you are facing a bunch of clumped up enemies, especially weak ones, this can be a whole lot more efficient than punching them out one at a time. With 3 dice though, and no add-ons, the damage can be pretty swingy. And yes, I have seen 3s, 4s, and 5s rolled with this feature, with a save for half. And it's not cheap. 2 focus points is a significant investment at level 6. And at level 6, spellcasters are casting fireballs and lightning bolts that do about twice the damage. The comparison to spells gets worse as you increase in level, despite the fact it does scale. But I have seen this be effective in some situations, so it's not a 1-star feature. But I am sorry, I cannot give it more than 2 stars. I would if they made it cost 1 focus point. And yes, if you are in a party that otherwise doesn't have area of effect options, it is more valuable. But more often than not, it's going to be a below average feature. And that brings us to level 11 and Stride of the Elements. While your elemental attunement is active, you also have a fly speed and a swim speed equal to your speed. And monks have a good speed. It's built in, And this is a nice expansion to that. Fly speed and or swim speed equal to your speed is not uncommon by this level in D&D, but your speed usually isn't monk speed. At level 11, a monk has a plus 20 foot unarmed movement bonus, and it's going to reach plus 30 at 17th level. And I should mention the synergy with our 3rd level elemental attunement feature. So the play I see with this is regularly, if you're facing an enemy that isn't flying, then you fly above them, potentially out of their reach, and then you make your unarmed strikes from safety. And if you hit them, you then pull them 10 feet towards you, lifting them 10 feet into the air, and then they drop, and they take d6 damage, and they fall prone. And then you can move in, and then make the rest of your attacks with advantage. I mean, technically you could just do the pull and the drop with every unarmed attack, so 5 times on a turn if you were to use Flurry of Blows. But it doesn't work well, because the prone condition says you have disadvantage to attack the prone creature if you're not within 5 feet of that enemy. So the better strategy is to move in and get advantage on follow-up attacks. I do want to point out here, there is, technically speaking, one other monk subclass that gets a fly speed. That is the Way of the Ascendant Dragon Monk that gets one at level 6. And they get a fly speed when they use Step of the Wind for that turn instead of a 10-minute duration. So that sucks. They also have limited use of it for some reason. And so there is no monk subclass other than this one that has a longer than a 1-turn flight feature. This is above average for monks at this level. I mean, 11 isn't fantastic for most monks, but this one is worth 4 out of 5 stars. And at level 17, we get Elemental Epitome. While your elemental attunement is active, you also gain the following benefits. Damage resistance. You gain resistance to one of the following damage types of your choice: acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. At the start of each of your turns, you can change that choice. Destructive Stride. When you use your Step of the Wind, your speed increases by 20 feet until the end of the turn. For that duration, any creature of your choice takes damage equal to 1 roll of your martial arts die when you enter a space within 5 feet of it. The damage type is your choice of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder, and a creature can take this damage only once per turn. And finally, Empowered Strikes. Once on each of your turns, you can deal extra damage to a target equal to 1 roll of your martial arts die when you hit it with an unarmed strike. The extra damage is the same type dealt by that strike. So let's start at the top with the damage resistance, which is a little bit like casting Protection from Energy on yourself, except there's no action required, there's no concentration required, and you can change the resistance type with no action if you need to. And although maybe that's not going to come up like in the middle of a combat very often, remember we can have our elemental attunement up for 10 minutes. So it could be multiple combats or challenges or hazards. So we might need to switch as our various hazards and enemies present themselves. Not that Protection from Energy is a super powerful spell, but, it's 3rd level, and then you take away the concentration, and you take away the action to cast it, and suddenly it's pretty good 3rd level spell. This is definitely superior to having 1 static damage resistance. Then we get Destructive Stride, which should be reminiscent of the Chardalon Stride spell, right? This, of course, combines with Flight or Swim, which we got at level 11, increasing those speeds as well. With a 60-foot base speed at this level, 20 more gives us an 80-foot speed when we use Step of the Wind. And since we use Step of the Wind, we can also dash as a bonus action, bringing us up to 160 feet, or 240 if we also use our action to dash. Now, this feature does not ignore attacks of opportunity on its own, but Step of the Wind does allow you to disengage as well as dash at a cost of 1 focus point. So, unless you want to trigger a bunch of opportunity attacks, that's a good expenditure. The damage, though, here is not that great. Basically, I'd say if you need to move a little further than usual, then you're going to use Step of the Wind, and now you can move even further. And you can do a bit of damage along the way. So, it's a nice add-on, but this one I don't see getting huge value from. And finally, we get the damage boost. And I just want to point out that this is limited to once on your turn. But you know what? We're likely going to hit with at least 1 unarmed strike, so it's basically a d12 damage added to our DPR. And if we score a critical hit, it should also double. Not every monk subclass gets a damage boost at any level, so this does put Warrior of Elements at least closer to the top in terms of damage at the highest levels. We end up with basically 3 features here that are packed into one. The first one is pretty good, the second one is fairly minor, and the third one is pretty good. Put them together and Warrior of Elements is probably a bit above the average for subclasses at this level. It's, I had to think a little bit between 3 and 4 stars, but I think it's closer to 4, meaning that with Warrior of Elements, level 6 is the only level that didn't get 4 stars or more. And it is no surprise that with the optimizers that I tend to play with, I've seen more Warrior of Elements monks since the 2024 Player's Handbook came out than, and no joke here, than every other monk subclass put together. Elemental Burst is the standout on this subclass as the only feature it gets that's not above average. Elemental Attunement gives its monk greater reach and more control than any other monk right out of the gate. Stride of the Elements makes it at least equal in terms of mobility to any other monk, depends what you're looking for, and eventually Elemental Epitome will allow it to outdamage a lot of monks, and it has a so-so area of effect option. That's a lot of things to stack into one subclass. And considering that the Way of the Four Elements monk was notorious for being underpowered before, many considering it the worst subclass in the game, this is quite the turnaround with the new rule set. And from this very powerful subclass to maybe the most iconic subclass, we're going to be looking at the Warrior of the Open Hand in my next video. But first, I just want to mention that this video would not be possible if it was not for the support of the patrons of this channel. So thank you so much to all my patrons, but I want to call out some specific patrons today. These are my Thaumaturge level patrons. If you would be interested in supporting this channel, please click the link down in the video description. But today, thank you to Airhead, Bloody Nine, Brian Dunn, new Thaumaturge. Welcome, Brian. Therazone, Brian, Chris C., Corell, Dank Train, Daristrix, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Dull Moon, Eden, Aaron, Eric Wasserman, FBKO5, Gishlife, Grizzly Badger, just upgraded to Thaumaturge. Welcome, Grizzly. Henry Malinowski, He That Is, Heisenberger, Hunter, James Makla, James Sprague, Jariru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Justin Times, Mark D, Math Guy Dave, PCZ, Quicksilver HG80, Ramen Goblin, Relax Fantasy Review, Samwise GamG, Scott Parsons, Sarek Steel Eye, Tim Gerbafic, Warfare, New Thaumaturge, Welcome Warfare, and William Whittles. Thanks to all my Thaumaturge level patrons, thanks to all patrons, and thanks to you if you have watched to the end. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.